Hi everyone. We're going to start the webinar now. Thank you for attending this webinar on sharing your science with the media. This webinar is part of AGU's Sharing Science program, which is our program that provides our members with the skills and resources, support, and opportunities to communicate their science with broader audiences. So if you want more information or resources, you can visit our website. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is listed there. Or if you're an AGU member, you should feel free, in fact, I encourage you to join the Sharing Science Network. So those of us from the Sharing Science team who will be involved in the webinar today are these people. So I'm Olivia Ambrogio. I'm the manager of the Sharing Science program here. Shane Hanlon, who's going to be talking next, is a specialist in sharing science, and he runs a lot of the core programs within it. Lauren Lefuma is a specialist in public information, so she works in essentially our press office and does a lot of the help scientists with the press releases for research that's come out in our journals. And then Nancy Bonfi, who's the manager of public information, will be joining us during the Q&A section. So I just want to mention also, if you have questions, we're going to be taking them at the end. So we ask you can put them in at any time. We're going to ask that you be writing the questions in that question/chat box on the right side of your screen. So you can type those in anytime that they occur to you, but we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. As we start, I just want to talk a little bit about why you should share your research with journalists. Now, obviously, all of you are on this webinar already, so to some extent, I'm probably preaching to the choir. But in case you're still a little uncertain, or if you're trying to want to convince colleagues that this is also valuable, I just want to go over a little bit of why you really should do this. So talking with journalists is an exciting way to get accurate scientific information out to really broad audiences, much wider than you would be able to disseminate to solely through a research paper or a scientific presentation. Also, if your research is funded by taxpayer dollars, this is a great way to show the public how valuable it is to invest in research and what your science is doing that has an impact on the community. Also, some grants require you to do outreach, so this is a great way to do that as well. And finally, it can be a lot of fun. It may be a little intimidating at first, but overall, people who have done it more than once have tended to enjoy it. So there are two main ways in which you can typically interact with the media. One is when you're sharing newsworthy research. So this is when either a reporter will contact you about some study that you're engaged in or a presentation you've given, or you'll have contacted a reporter to let them know about some research that you're doing or a study that's going to come out of yours that you think is really newsworthy. The other way that you can interact with reporters is to be a resource for them. So let's say you're a seismologist and there's been an earthquake recently. If reporters know about your availability, they can contact you to get some background information on that topic. So Shane is going to talk to you a bit about sharing newsworthy research.
Thanks, Olivia. Okay. So first things first, when thinking about how do you know if your research is newsworthy in the first place? Your science is important. Science as an endeavor is incredibly important. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's newsworthy. And we understand that this can be harsh, but it's also true. So when is a when is a study newsworthy? When is your research newsworthy? Well, when you have results that are new, exciting, they've never been found before. If you have something that's unusual, so if you look at some of these headlines, we have the grandiose canyons on a Saturn moon filled with liquid methane. That's new. That's exciting. That's a headline-grabbing or a grabbing headline that people will really latch on to. You have behind the stunning white cliffs of Dover, scientists unlock a mystery of algae. This is new. This is potentially unusual. Scientists reveal sharks surprising social networks. This is something that might go against the current understanding or our current thinking. Anytime you have a significant advancement in the field, so maybe not necessarily these incremental increases, a more significant advancement, and things that are current. So reporters are interested in what's going on now, what is going to be not only a really good headline, but it's going to be part of current events. Related to that, they want to make sure that it's relevant to their audiences. So depending on the outlet will depend on whether they find your research newsworthy or not. They want to make sure that their readers enjoy it, or their listeners or their viewers. Do your results potentially go against the grain? Were they unexpected? Are they kind of not usual within your field? Do your results set a record? Is it the biggest? Is it the longest? Is it the oldest? So this warm Pacific blob facilitated vast toxic algal blooms. This study found that the toxins were in the greatest amount ever found in this specific field, but it was also relevant to audiences. It was harming wildlife, but at the same time, it was harming human health. With this, does it set a record? And also, the last thing to think about is, are there striking photos or videos? Is the imagery really vivid? So in this headline, scientists think they've solved the mystery of how volcanic lightning forms. When you look at this, you see this still of this video, and the video is even more impressive. This really pulls people in. People are going to want to click on that. They're going to want to read it. On the flip side, you need to know when, it's helpful to know when your news is not, or excuse me, when your story is not newsworthy. When's it not news? Did you show an incremental advance in the field? Did you improve upon a current model or technique? Are you confirming what's already known? This one's really important, and especially in science. This idea that science is reproducible is incredibly important. However, it's not going to be newsworthy. Are you providing a summary or writing a review paper, or have the results been previously reported? And so we have this kind of great quick guide to Are My Results Newsworthy? This is available on our website, and we'll talk more later about some of the other resources that we have. Okay, so you have newsworthy research results. Now what? How do you share them? First thing you want to do is contact your public information officer. You have one of these at your institution. So it might be called a public information officer, or your press office, or your communications individuals. They'll have different names, but this is essentially your press office at your university. And one of their goals is to help you take your research and get it out to members of the press to then disseminate more broadly. If you're publishing in our journals, you can contact our press office. So Nancy and Lauren are our press office here, our public information individuals. You can contact them at news@agu.org. What you want to also keep in mind is make contact with your public information officers, your PIOs, as soon as you submit your paper. This might seem a little counterintuitive because you don't know how long the review process is going to take. You don't even know if your manuscript's going to get accepted. However, if your PIOs, your comms folks, are aware that you have this study out there, that you are trying to get published, even if it takes a little bit of time, having them aware of that will at least lay the groundwork for them then getting in contact with members of the press or getting it out there. Because once the paper has been published, it's too late. You need to set that groundwork ahead of time. So this is an example of where you'd find this kind of contact at an institution. So this is Woods Hole. You can see where the arrow's pointing to press room. You click on that, and then there's contact information for, in this case, it's the Media Relations Office. So again, different names, same functions. At AGU, it's on our front page. So you can go to our newsroom link, And then these are, on the right-hand side, you see all of the media contacts that we have. And there are a number of ways to communicate your research when going through your PIOs, your comms folks. You can do it through a press release. If you're at, say, for example, our annual meeting every year, there's potentially the opportunity to hold a press conference on it. We push out a lot of our research through social media, and there's opportunities to do it through blog posts as well. So at HU, we have Geospace. If your research is more field-related, we have the field and a couple other avenues as well. So you identified that your research is newsworthy, you know who to talk to. How and why is talking with the media different from communicating with scientists? So we like to show this inverted pyramid. So on your left, you have your traditional structure for a research paper, presentation, that type of thing. So you do your introduction, your methods, your results, and then your conclusions and discussion. And that last part's really the bulk of it. That's what really hits home. That's the main message of your manuscript. For a news story and for a lot of communication outside of the sciences in general, you want to flip that. You want to put your results and conclusions first, then the implications, and then if you have time or space, get into the research details and the methods. And we go with this structure for two reasons. One is an old school reason where when we had primarily print news, if there was an article that was too long, an editor would oftentimes literally cut off the bottom of the story. And if you do that to a traditional research paper, you cut off the good stuff. You're getting rid of the discussion, the conclusions, the meat of it. If you do that with this inverted pyramid, you're only getting rid of research details, methodology, things that are important for the science and are very necessary to know, but probably aren't as interesting to some of the audiences, for the journalists, for the reporters. The other reason why we really go with this style is because, especially now, people's attention spans are less, let's say. People are pulling in information in smaller tidbits. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, news headlines have to really grab your attention. So pulling in more information in a smaller amount of space is really the way to go nowadays. So the rule is make sure you start with the results, the news, and then broaden the story with more detail. All right, so next we're going to shift it over to Lauren, who's going to talk about crafting a message.
Okay, so let's say now you're ready to talk to a reporter about some newsworthy research. How should you begin to think about how you want to convey your message to that reporter? Well, the first thing is, what is your message? A message is really a distillation of your key points. It's not every single detail of your research study, it's the high points. It's the big picture, key things that you want to convey about your research. A news story is not an information dump. It doesn't include everything. It's just those few main pieces that a lay audience will be able to understand and pick up. So when you're making a message for a reporter, you want to break it down into three parts: what we know, what is new, and why it matters. So if we go into more detail on that, what we know is the context and the background. This gives the reader a frame of reference. So what is already known about this topic or this field? Why are you conducting this study in the first place? Why is it important to study this? Give them a frame of reference. For example, if you study the Pine Island Glacier in Antarctica, well, to someone outside of the field, they may not understand why studying that glacier is important. But if you say, well, it's the fastest melting glacier in Antarctica, that provides them the appropriate context to understand your study. The next part is what is new. That is your new result, your new scientific finding. And what you want to include in that is how your result compares to what is already known about this field or about this topic. Does your result, is it counterintuitive in some way? Is it unusual? What is its connection to our lives or the general consensus on this area? And the third part is why it matters. This is the societal impact. Who is impacted on this and how? Who benefits? Who suffers? If someone were to come up to you off the street and say to you, why should I care about your research? You really need to be able to answer that question to them. It's why should we care? And the third aspect of it is the human dimension. How does this affect people directly? The other part of that is, what is your own human experience with this? You really want to make it personal and include personal anecdotes and stories from the field. You know, what was your journey in conducting this research? How did it affect you? Those are what is going to allow your reader to connect with you and with your story and your message. So to give you an example, this is an example of a press release that we put out last year here at AGU. Obviously, you can see that it's about ocean acidification affecting coral reefs in the Florida Keys. So if we were to break down the message from this story and this scientist into those three parts I just mentioned, what we know is that oceans are absorbing carbon dioxide. That lowers the pH of ocean water. Lower pH can dissolve coral reefs. Now, previous research showed that the pH in this particular area was expected to be low enough to dissolve coral reefs not until around mid-century or so. But what was new, what was found in this study, is that the pH is already low enough and the coral reefs are already dissolving. So this is now happening 40 to 50 years earlier than it was expected. Why does this matter? Well, you can't just say, well, you know, the ocean's important and leave it at that. You have to go into a little more detail, and what you want to do is have a complete train of thought from your research results to people's lives. So we know that if the reefs are, why it matters is that if reefs are already being affected, that means other ocean ecosystems are going to be affected. The reef is kind of the barometer for how the health of the ocean. And unhealthy oceans literally affect our way of life. They produce the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and they provide food and sustenance for us. So we're literally dependent on them. The other part, which I didn't include here because there wasn't enough space, is that we have a commercial interest in this. The coral reefs in the Florida Keys have a value of over $7 billion because of all the commercially and recreationally important fish that live there. So those are the things that you kind of want to include in your message. So then the next part of this is, you want to take those three things, so what we know, what's new, and why it matters, and you want to boil all of that down into your take-home message. And your take-home message is really the 2 or 3 main points that you want the reader to remember about your study. And the other thing you want to include is, you want to give them an opportunity to, if your research kind of presents a problem, then you want to give them an opportunity to be a part of the solution. What I mean by that is, you want to end on a positive note. Doom and gloom isn't really a great message to put out there. You don't want to be like this guy, screaming around, oh, the end is near, but please recycle. That kind of doesn't make sense. So what you want to do is give people, make them realize that there's an opportunity to be a part of a solution. So you might say, here, we have a great opportunity to safeguard our quality of life, our health, our resources, and make sure that they can be enjoyed for generations to come. Now, this doesn't apply to every science story. For example, if you've just discovered a new exoplanet, there really isn't a solution that needs to be a part of. But for things like climate change, this is definitely a good thing to include. So if we go back to that example I just gave you earlier about the ocean acidification story, these are actual quotes from the scientist that were used in the press release. This was his take-home message, that we don't have as much time as we thought. The reefs are already dissolving. And what he wants people to do is realize that we need to get serious about reducing carbon dioxide emissions today, not later. All right. So now we're going to have a few message development tips in addition to what I just mentioned. So you want to make sure that you speak the same language. A lot of times if a scientist is giving a talk and, you think maybe your research is being understood and everyone's really into it, sometimes what actually happens is they have no idea what you're talking about. So what you want to do is use shared language. And by that I mean use clear, simple terms, and again, provide that context that gives them a frame of reference. Avoid getting bogged down in the minor details of your study. If you go back to that press release that I talked about earlier, we did not talk about the complicated carbonate chemistry of ocean acidification. In fact, the most that we go into that in the press release is just to say that it lowers seawater pH. We do not go any further than that because it's just too much detail for this kind of a story for a lay audience. And you want to avoid using jargon and acronyms whenever you can. If you must use a technical term, be sure you define it, but you want to avoid that as much as possible. And we don't want you to think of this as dumbing it down. Instead, what we want you to think of it as is just using the same language as a lay audience. The other thing is that you want to keep things relevant to the audience at hand. So for example, if you have a study about drought, it's not really helpful to talk about the levels of soil moisture and how they've changed over time. Instead, you want to keep it relevant. Say drought has intensified, it's put pressure on our stressed water resources, it's increasing wildfires throughout the region. So you want to make sure, again, drive it home, create that connection between your research and people's lives. Another thing you can do is use social math, which provides a sense of scale. So what that means is just taking a quantity that's expressed in your paper or in your research and comparing it to a known quantity, something that's already known and that's easy to picture or digest. So a very classic example of this is comparing something to the height of the Empire State Building. In this example, this glacier in Alaska, in a little over 20 years, had deflated by about 1,200 feet. Now, 1,200 feet doesn't mean a lot to most people, but if you say, oh, it deflated by the height of the Empire State Building, that gives them a sense of scale. Another example that people often use is, the length of a certain number of football fields or the amount of water in an Olympic swimming pool. And a really good, if you're new to this and haven't done it before, a really good resource for you is a website that's called The Measure of Things. So if you just Google The Measure of Things, this will come up. And what you can do is put in a known quantity from your research. It could be length, it could be size, it could be area, it could be volume, mass, and the website will then spit out a number of comparisons for you. Very helpful. The other thing you want to do is use metaphors, analogies, and stories. Our brains are really hardwired to retain information through storytelling. So tell a story that really is very helpful to you. We don't have time to go into the ins and outs of storytelling in this webinar, but we are going to have one about storytelling later in the year. So just stay tuned for more info about that. But use analogies and metaphors when you're talking about science. Here are a couple examples that I really like. This one on the right. So back when the gravitational waves discovery was announced last year, these two reporters at the Washington Post were discussing how the black holes were circling each other and warping the space around them faster and faster, and they described it as a blender cranked up to infinity. It's a really powerful image that will stick with the reader, and it'll make them remember your research. The other thing is to know your audience. Think about who your reporter writes for. What is their outlet? Do they write for a newspaper? Do they write for a scientific publication or a science-specific publication, excuse me? Sorry. Do they write for children or teens or adults? These are all things to keep in mind when you're crafting your message. All right, finally, so hooray, reporters are calling you for interviews. Now what do you do? So when a reporter calls, it is totally okay to tell them you need a few minutes to gather your thoughts and you can call them back. It's okay to take that time and just kind of jot your message down, get all your notes handy, and so that you're prepared to answer their questions. But the thing is, you want to always ask for and respect their deadlines. Reporters are usually under pretty tight deadlines, so if you say you're going to call them back in a certain amount of time, please do that. And if you absolutely can't meet their deadline, just refer them to another scientist from your project who can. It's totally okay to have notes in front of you as a reference, and think of other sources, think of other scientists who are either connected to the project or sometimes who aren't, who can comment on it. And offer supplemental photos and videos and other materials that will help the reporter tell the story. If a reporter asks you a question and you don't know how to answer it, there's a couple things you can say. You could say, I don't know the answer, but I can find out and get back to you. You can tell them, but you can put them in touch with someone who does know the answer. Or you could say, that's beyond my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is, and then bridge back to those main messages that we talked about, your kind of take-home message. So briefly, I want to go over what is meant by on the record. So on the record means that anything you say in an interview can be published and can be attributed to you by name. So here's an example of that right here. That White House press secretary, his name is quoted in this article. Off the record means that what you say is for the reporter's use only and cannot be published. Then there's this third part, which means different things to different people, but generally it's called on background or not for attribution. And that means that anything you say can be printed in the article, but it can't be attributed to you by name or by job title. And the thing is, as a rule, like pretty much every thing you say with the reporter, from the moment you pick up the phone until the moment you hang up, is on the record. Unless you specify beforehand that what you're going to say might be off the record. And if you're new to this, we would really encourage you to just always assume and always stay on the record. Don't try to mess around with going off the record for part of it and going back on the record for another part of the interview. It gets confusing. You really just want to stay on the record the whole time. And the other thing to remember is that once you've already been talking to a reporter, you can't go backwards and retroactively apply the off-the-record rule. You know, if you're like, oh, well, you know, that guy's research is just not really worth anything. Oh, wait, don't print that. That doesn't work. If you want something to be off the record, you must explicitly state it ahead of time. So it's a good idea when you're on the phone with a reporter just to clarify up front that what's going to be on the record and what's not. So I do have some bad news for you, and that is that journalists will not allow you to see their story or review it before it's printed. And this is just standard journalism, and that has nothing to do with you. The reason for this is that journalists are seen as the impartial observers. Their job is to report the facts. And by sending you their story to review, even if it's just for fact-checking, that could be seen as letting you influence their story. And they don't want to do that, so that is why you can't review their story. I know it's a hard thing to accept for a scientist, especially when the story is about your own personal research, but that's just the way it is, and you have to accept it. Now, but there are things, now occasionally journalists get things wrong, and it's really your job to help them get the facts right. Always repeat yourself. Offer to give them more information or clarify if you need to. Offer to fact check, but remember that they won't show you their whole story. Ask them to repeat your words back to you if you're unsure if they're understanding you. But it's really your job to make sure that your message is so clear there's no ambiguity, that there's no way the reporter could misinterpret what you're saying. And now occasionally reporters may use, may write things in a way that you would not have written it. Remember, you have to accept that they have creative license here. Your job is to give them the information, but their job is to make it interesting for their readers. They may write something in a way that maybe you wouldn't have written, but it's still accurate. Or they may use a word that's not quite as specialized as a word that you may have used. So if that happens, you really kind of have to let it go. If something is factually wrong in a story, definitely bring it to their attention. But otherwise, if it's just like an issue of, maybe they said something that's not quite the way you would have said it, you have to just take a lesson from Elsa and let it go. All right, so what happens if you're discussing a controversial topic? First thing you want to do is do your homework and prepare your messages in advance. Think about what kind of questions might arise from talking about this topic. Anticipate them and have answers ready. The important thing is just to be prepared. Avoid making negative statements about other researchers or their methods. And always just find a way to bridge back to your main messages. Have transition statements ready, and don't step deeper into the controversy. You could say things like, well, I see where you're going with that, but what I'd really like to emphasize is X, and then go back to your main message. All right, and so now I'm going to hand it over to Olivia, and she's going to talk about being a resource for journalists.
Thanks, Lauren. So yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the other way that you can interact with the media. In addition to being interviewed about your own research or talking about your research that's newsworthy, you can be a resource. And if I can advance the slide, I can tell you more about that. So you can make yourself available as an expert on issues. You can be discussing new research that isn't necessarily yours. You might have noticed that often in articles about science, they'll have someone quoted, another scientist, whom they'll say, who did not work on this particular paper or did not publish on this study. Often it's great if reporters can find someone else in the field to also comment on current research. Also, this is especially relevant if your research is at anything related to natural hazards or extreme weather events, because you can discuss a current event. So if a hurricane occurs, or again, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, and your expertise is in those areas, you can let reporters know that they can contact you for more information about those kinds of events, about those hazards. So if you want to do this, one way that you can is, again, to contact your public information office, let them know about your area of expertise and that you're interested in being available in this way. You can also join AGU's Sharing Science Network and let us know that you're interested in being available, because we actually have a whole database of individuals who have some experience talking with reporters who have agreed to be available and on call should we need them, or should journalists contact us looking for an expert in a certain field? Another really good way to make sure that you are a resource is to establish long-term relationships with journalists. So once you get to know a few reporters, just inform them when a new paper of yours is coming out. Invite them out for coffee sometimes, or invite them on a tour of your lab to let them know what you're doing and the different aspects of the research that you're engaged in. Or let them know about other current research that's going on in your field that you think is really exciting. And above all, when you're talking with journalists, just, remember to relax, and remember that it's sort of a new skill for a lot of scientists to be speaking in these sort of simple, repeated messages. It's not how we're trained in the science fields, but that doesn't mean that you can't get used to it. And it takes some practice, but as with everything else, you get better with practice. So do consider, even if you have, maybe been interviewed once and you didn't feel it went as well as you'd like, well, the next time it'll go better. Remember to keep calm. Remember to focus on the big picture, the broader context when you're talking. And, whenever you're in doubt, as Lauren was already talking about, just reinforce those main messages. Because, remember, those are the things that you want both the journalists and their readers or viewers to take away. So what's next? Now that we've told you all of this great information about how to work with the media, well, we hope that you'll actually go out and talk with the media. And again, I hope that you'll consider looking into our resources, the Sharing Science resources, for more information both in talking with reporters and in doing communication and outreach generally. So again, visit our website, follow us on Twitter, join the Sharing Science Network. As Shane was mentioning earlier, our website has a ton of resources, including a lot of great tips related to working with journalists. So tips for radio and TV interviews, which we didn't cover here, some general tips, and also, again, that great checklist of Are My Results Newsworthy? If you sign up to be a part of the Sharing Science Network, not only will we be able to reach out to you with opportunities specific to your expertise and the areas of communication that you're interested in, but you'll get a snazzy monthly newsletter that will highlight engagement opportunities, other workshops and webinars available for you, examples of great science communication that can inspire you, and also the science of science communication and what researchers have found is most effective. So you can get more information if you check out our blog, as we mentioned, The Plain Spoken Scientist. This has a lot of guest bloggers who are typically scientists talking about their experiences doing all sorts of science outreach and communication. You can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, we're everywhere. Check out our FAQ in working with the media. That's also through the Sharing Science website. And if you feel, after having listened to this, that you do have some great newsworthy research that's going to be coming out, then contact news.agu.org and submit some publicity information about your paper. And Lauren or Nancy can get back to you about that. So with that, thank you again for attending. And we're going to start answering questions. If you've already asked one in the questions/chat window, thank you. If not, and you have one, then please put it in now, and we'll try to address them all.
All right. So let's see. We'll start from, here we go. All right, we have a question says, I've always been told by various agencies to never ever speak to the media, but refer them to the PIO. Advice on that?
Yes. Hi, this is Nancy. I am the manager of the Public Information Office here at AGU, and that is true. I mean, if you work for a government agency, a lot of times they do want you to contact the Public Information Office or the Public Affairs Office before you speak to the media. And so I guess I would say broadly, even if just to check with your Public Information Office and see what their policy is. That's not the same at every university and every agency. So it's always a good idea to check with them first and see, what their policy is. And it's also good to make a relationship with those folks, because even if, they don't have that policy in place, they are people who can help you in communicating your science to reporters and work with you on press releases and things like that. So always a good idea to make yourself known to those folks and find out what the policy is.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. So one we have that's a little bit broader, Olivia and I could probably do one of these, but one of the goals of science communication is outreach to kids who we can hopefully inspire to consider science careers. What's your specific advice for good outlets for this? Any specific tips on communicating science to younger audiences?
This is a great question. I think, in terms of outlets, it's really going to depend. You can certainly look into various, as Lauren was talking about, there are magazines and sort of online sources that are exclusively about presenting news or even just scientific information to students or to kids. And those are definitely places that you can look into to see if they want scientists to be talking with them or to be interviewed. Another way, of course, though, is to work with local schools. So you can get in touch really with either heads of departments or specific teachers, if you know them, to find out what their curriculum is for the year, if there's something that you could come in and talk about, or even if there are just some resources that you could provide to a teacher. Something to keep in mind if you're working with schools is that teachers really do have curricula that they have to stick with. So if what your field, if what you research doesn't match that, don't be offended if they don't want to have you come in. It's not because they don't think, it's not because you wouldn't be welcome, it's just because they have to follow a certain curriculum. But definitely ask them and see if there are ways that you can plan ahead with them to come in and either talk to a class or otherwise give some resources.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. That's how I got started. I have a scientific background. That's how I got started doing outreach, and I just go to schools, talk to students. I was at a local botanical garden. A lot of these places, if you're looking for outlets, you can just start asking around. Organizations, schools, a bunch of places are always looking for folks to talk to their class, their group, especially scientists, especially energetic, engaging scientists.
Yeah, this is Lauren. I would just add, yes, see, there are specific news outlets for kids. As I mentioned, there's Science News for Kids. Just take a look at their website and see the kind of things, how they communicate. Definitely give you some ideas.
And also, just one last thing from me, Olivia, check out our blog, Plain Spoken Scientists. I can't remember our post at this time, but we have a few guest bloggers who've spoken specifically about communicating with kids that might give you some inspiration, both for outlets and for some great techniques for really getting them engaged.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Our next one is, can you clarify what you said about when to contact your PR department about published research? So should you wait until an article is accepted but before publication, or right after submission?
Hi, this is Nancy again. You should contact them as early as possible, and that means even before you submit your paper. Any public information officer, obviously, at your institution is not going to spread around your research, so there's no, you don't have to be worried about that. They just want to get a heads up as early as possible, because sometimes the process can move quickly. I know sometimes it moves slowly, but sometimes it can move very quickly, and it's really a good idea to give them a heads up well before, when you're about to submit, or even before you're going to submit. Like I said, it's a good idea to even reach out to them if you just have an interesting project, and then you can get to know them, and then when it does come time for you to share the results of that research, those people in your PR office already have a background in what you're doing. But again, I would not wait until a paper is accepted. It's really at the submission stage, or even prior to submission stage, that it's best to contact them about your research.
I would add to that, yeah. I mean, part of the reason is that once your paper is accepted and published and posted online, anyone can see it, anyone can report on it, and it takes time to put some publicity together. And so if your paper is published online and then it takes your press office a week or two to put a press release together, at that point, the study might be too old that reporters may not want to cover it. It's not a hard and fast rule, but generally reporters like to cover stories that are just coming out that day or that week. So if it takes a couple of weeks to prepare the publicity, at that point it might be old news and reporters may not cover it. So that's why you want to give them as much lead time as possible.
Great. So a quick housekeeping question. Can you make these slides available to us? Why, yes. Yes, we can. Afterwards, probably in a few days, maybe early next week, we'll send out an email to everyone who participated or who attended the webinar, sending you all a link to the webinar. So if you missed something today, you want to reference it later, if you want to share it later, that'll be available to you all. So we'll definitely pass that along. All right. So we have a question. I'm a PhD student. Do I have enough expertise to be a resource for journalists? Short answer is yes. I'll let Olivia go a little bit further there.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Again, yes, as Shane said, and I really want to emphasize this. You do have enough expertise. I think so often in the sciences we see this. Certainly this was my experience when my background's in biology when I was in science, and certainly I see this with our member scientists too. There's this fear that you don't have enough expertise in a particular area. But you have to remember that journalists and the public, who are the two real audiences and the two people who are going to be wanting to know about this topic, are not secret members of your dissertation committee. They're not going to be asking you deeply technical questions about areas that you feel a little uncertain about. Instead, they're going to want to ask general questions about things like, how do earthquakes happen? What can we do to protect ourselves when they happen, if they're talking about seismology, or what have you. These are going to be really broad questions about the field, things that you definitely have enough expertise for. And remember, even if you're starting out in your field, you may feel like less of an expert compared to, say, your advisor, but compared to the general public, you have a wealth of knowledge that you should not hesitate to share.
Great. Thanks, Olivia. Is there a list of websites beside AGU ones where one can submit a press release or offer one's expertise as a resource for journalists?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, first of all, I don't know where you are, where you work, but I would say pretty much every institution, academic institution, colleges, universities, government agencies, research institutions that I can think of all have a press office. Now, they may not, some small colleges may not have a science writer on staff, but they definitely have a press office, and they would definitely be interested in hearing about your research and being a resource for journalists as an expert. I think that there are other probably nonprofit communication outlets, that you could also work with to get your research out there. And maybe it's worth getting back to you to maybe look around and maybe getting back to you offline about that, what those might be. But I would definitely start with if you're at any sort of research institution, or if you're not, maybe one of your co-authors on a paper might be, and that might be an option. All the journals, like AGU, obviously journals, but all the journals have a press office. So those are all places that I can think of, to definitely reach out to. Did you have another?
Yeah, this is Olivia. Just one other thing, not exclusive to journalists per se, but I'd say also look to see if there are blogs that are written by scientists in your field that are popularizing science, because that's definitely a great way to present the information to a wider audience, and may also be a way that journalists are looking for information or finding information that they can then contact you.
And what came to my mind too, there are also now, about reaching out yourself. I mean, that's not unheard of. If you have a blog or a blog that covers research in your field, reach out to them. There's also this website called, which I'm not entirely, an expert on, but it's called The Conversation, where scientists write about their own research. So I'm just saying it doesn't always have to be, if you're at a small place and you're not, they're not really receptive to what you're trying to offer them in terms of, a press release about your research. In this day and age, you can go out there by yourself and publish, a story that you write, in a kind of a layman's terms about your research. So that's another option, I think.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Nancy and Olivia. All right. So another question is, there's research out there that would suggest that the representations of science from science journalism presents an unrealistic view of science and possibly emphasizes these rare, grandiose findings in science and presents a skewed view on the publish of science, potentially pushing a divide between public understanding and what science really is. And paraphrasing, but essentially creating this fundamental disconnect between science journalism and science. Just thoughts on ways to move forward beyond this or help lessen this divide or bridge this gap?
I have a few thoughts. This is Nancy again. One thought that we mentioned here is to work with your public information office. I mean, that's a way to get the message that you want out to reporters and out to the public. I mean, that's what we say when we hold press conferences and why you should hold a press conference or why you should write a press release. You know, you can really work with these experts to cultivate and get out the message that you want. You know, if there's background that you want to provide. Also, when you're working with reporters, provide them with that background. Explain the background to them. Explain what research came before. Whenever I write a press release or anyone in our office writes a press release, we always ask, what's new about this research? What came before? You know, provide me with some context. You know, and that can go a long way in providing context. Another thing that Olivia was talking about is cultivate a relationship with a reporter that you trust, that you like. You know, so they have a chance to come visit your lab. They have a chance to see research in action and how it happens, and maybe come out with you on a field trip, on a research trip. I mean, some of the best science stories are when reporters are out in the field with researchers. You know, it's just a great experience for them, but also for you, that they really get to understand what goes into science, and it's not necessarily always the grabbing headline that makes these wonderful stories, I think. And another thing, I know we have a really strong network at AGU of bloggers who blog about, you know, not only their own research, but research in the field. If that's something that, you know, I think that's another way to have a blog about your field research, about research in your area, that can really give reporters and the public, I think, you know, a really greater understanding of how science gets done and how research gets done. So I think those are all ways that you can kind of, you know, hopefully work to bridge that gap between just the headline that comes out and the scientific enterprise.
Yeah. I would just also say, this is Olivia, you know, I think to some extent we talked about when results are newsworthy and just what's going to be attention grabbing or something that's going to be of interest to readers. And so yes, that's sort of necessarily going to skew what's out there towards what's more new and exciting, what's a kind of bigger result. But as Nancy said, the context that you put around a story is going to help better frame that. So yes, maybe what you're talking about is just one of the, you know, 7 papers that you've published in the past year, and is representative of, you know, 4 years of work. But talk about that when you're talking with the reporter. Say, you know, the way that these exciting things happen is that a lot of unexciting things happen first.
Yeah.
And that's critical to the process of science. And we know that that's not what makes these big stories, but that's how we got here. And, you know, again, if you put, as Lauren talked about it, that human dimension in, then part of that longer development and relationship that you have within the science can also become the story.
Great. So another question we have is, do you use a tool to analyze the text for grade level? How important is it in communicating science results?
This is Lauren. I can answer that one. I personally do. I use several things. There's a tool in Microsoft Word that lets you track the reading ease. I think it's it's called Fleisch-Kincaid reading ease, and it tells you the grade level of the text that you're writing. And so you can modify the text to be, you know, any grade level. There's the whole thing is there's a score from like 1 to over 100 of how easily it will be understood by a different audience. That's something I use every day. So in our press releases, we usually aim to have it written at about a 9th grade reading level or so. Usually we say like high school, but early high school, and sometimes even less. So that's our goal, and that's definitely a goal for you when talking to reporters. There's also, there's a couple text editors online. There's one that's called Expresso, E-X-P-R-E-S-S-O, and that also allows you just to enter a body of text, and then it will show you how many of all the words that you're using, like how many of them are like common words, how many of them are very rare words, and we'll give you like suggestions for replacing those words with others that are more common. So if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, and I would just add that from a less of a reporting standpoint, but a tool that we use in sharing science a lot when we're talking with folks about eliminating jargon or reducing kind of technical talk, is that we use something called the UpGoer 5 text editor. And briefly, basically, it's a box where you can go in and you type in whatever your message is, and it forces you to get your message down to the 1,000 most common words in the English language, and it has to be 1,000 because 1,000 is not one of these. And so it's a really fun way for scientists especially to put their message, put their science into a way that is in these 1,000 most common words. Now, I will stress that oftentimes when you do this, your message is in common words, but it might not necessarily be more readily understandable. We ask folks to use this technique because if you take very technical terminology, your science, your abstract, whatever it is, and if you can break it down into the 1,000 most common words in the English language, then finding something somewhere in the middle that is both understandable and accessible and attractive, that will be a lot easier. So again, it's not quite for writing a story per se, but it's a great way to break down these barriers. And I will mention that later this year, we'll keep you all apprised if you've joined the network and get on our newsletter, but we will be doing an entire webinar dedicated to jargon and kind of plain spoken English. And so if you're really interested in this type of thing and part of these basics of communication, definitely make sure that you tune in for that. All right, so a couple more before we get off here. How can you tell if a journalist understands what I'm saying? So I guess from a science perspective, how can they actually understand if a journalist understands what they're saying?
This is Lauren. I would just say a couple things. Ask them to repeat your words back to you. First of all, repeat yourself. You can say the same thing in several different ways. Use metaphors and analogies, and ask them to repeat it back to you in their own words. That's a really great way to see if they understand. Make sure that you clarify everything, make sure there's no ambiguity, use clear, simple language. Nancy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good idea to also be available as a resource afterwards and say if there's anything you don't understand, feel free to email me and let me know, and I can, I'm more than happy to explain it to you again. I've had scientists who say, start talking about something and say, do you know what that is? And in some cases I don't. I say, no, can you explain that to me? So that's really, if you're kind of talking and you think, the reporter, they're reporters who don't cover science at all and are just calling you because they were assigned to that story, and then there are reporters who cover science and have a PhD in whatever you're discussing, but you may not necessarily know that. So it's always good to just ask, do you know how an earthquake happens, for an example, but also just to be available as a resource and say, here's my phone number, here's my email, please let me know if there's any questions you have when you're writing your story.
Great. All right, and then we'll do one more. So kind of a broader question, because these provide a little bit of basics. How should I prepare for a radio or a TV interview?
Sure, this is Lauren again. So pretty much just like we say with preparing for a print interview, is we tell you to prepare your main messages in advance if you're talking to a reporter. For a TV or radio interview that's live or being taped, absolutely prepare in advance and just rehearse. Knowing the words in your head and knowing your message is very different than speaking it out loud, especially under the pressure of a live camera or a live radio interview broadcast. So just say it over and over again to yourself. Repeat it, say it several different ways. So you don't want to sound like you're reading from a script. So definitely write out your notes, but don't read it verbatim. Say it in your own words, but say it, rehearse it well enough so that you can say it without looking at your notes. Nancy, do you have anything to add?
One way, is to practice for someone else. Call your friend on the phone. Record yourself on your phone. That's always a good one. A radio or TV interview, also just some basics. If you're not going to be in the studio, being in the studio is actually best, but if you're not going to be in the studio, make sure you're on a landline so your cell phone doesn't cut out or it's a bad connection. Ask them if this is live or if it's recorded. I mean, that's a good one to know. You're going to be able to go back and if you make a mistake. If you're on the phone, one thing, that we say is to actually stand up, have a smile on your face. That actually does come through when you're talking on the phone or on the radio. If you're on TV, wear solid colors. Don't wear anything stripes or kind of crazy prints. Those don't pick up well on TV. But like Lauren said, it's really just good to practice. Find someone who to practice with. Find some, sort of sound bites or analogies, like Lauren was saying, that you can use over and over again, or that you're comfortable with using. Those are the basics, I think.
Yeah, I would just add, and if you mess up during a live interview, it's okay. Don't get flustered. It happens. Just back up and start over again, and just stay calm and relax. Hope maybe it'll be able to be edited out, maybe not, but it's okay. It's all right if you get flustered and you mess up. Just stay calm and just keep going. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for attending our webinar today. Like I said, in probably early next week, we'll send you an email with a link to this, where the archived version is, and you can check out our other webinars, their archived versions as well. And then we'll be doing more of these throughout the year. So stay tuned. Thank you again.
Thank you.